Depending on your perspective, it's either fascinating or irritating when the subject of the legacy of Pearl Jam is brought up. It's fascinating if you're one of those, like yours truly Curmudgeons, who believe Pearl Jam is not only one of the three greatest American bands of the 1990s, but also the last great American band that genuinely and actually meant something to their legions of multi-generational fans who want their rock heroes to stand for social justice, civil rights, and righteous political causes, and not be apologetic about it. It's irritating if you're one of those music fans who think Pearl Jam were, or still are, middle-of-the-road rock with no edge, or middling dude bro jock rock for people to jump around together to. Well, those people are wrong, and we will present an ironclad argument as to why they are wrong. This episode will be the first in an ongoing series of the Curmudgeon Rock Report that takes a big-name band/artist who has an underrated legacy that is explained, discussed, examined, and has a giant, well-deserved spotlight shined on it. Along with celebrated author and concert promoter Ronen Givony as special guest, welcome to Pearl Jam, a Legacy.
Welcome, everyone, to the 23rd edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Christopher O'Connor coming to you from suburban Houston, and with me, as always, is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea, and we host the podcast made just for you. We don't do hot takes, we do honest takes. So then, this belongs to you. Who are you? You are the rock geek iconoclastic outsider looking for safe haven in a world where rock no longer predominates. Well, rock and roll sure as heck does predominate here on the Curmudgeon Rock Report, where we not only celebrate the music, we live its majesty in full color and at full force. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff you never knew before. Join our curmudgeonly community. Subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, and all the other places where you find all the other podcasts. Drop us a line at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod. And coming very soon, and I mean very soon, you'll be able to become part of our own private Facebook group, where you can share thoughts, musings, and random excitement with fellow travelers along the curmudgeonly path to rock and roll goodness. Well then, how you doing, Arturo?
I'm doing great. Speaking about learning stuff that you might learn some stuff. I think our millions and millions of listeners are going to learn a lot about Pearl Jam. I've been excited about this episode for a while. This series, obviously our Prince Michael Jackson series, is coming to an end very soon. Obviously, those guys eventually died.
Yes, they did. Last time I checked, they were still dead.
Yeah. So we got to come up with a new series. And this will be the first one in our A Legacy series. I'll talk about it a little later. But Pearl Jam seemed like the obvious pick to go with the first band for this, considering how they're such a big name band, such a popular band that's also very polarizing. But the book that was published earlier this year by Ronen Givony, has got a lot of good reviews. It seemed like the perfect time to do a spotlight on Pearl Jam and get Mr. Givony on the show himself.
Yes, we did. Very excited about that. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, Pearl Jam deserves a respected, or they deserve respect, and they deserve a respectful spotlight. You know, these days everybody's about the Nirvana and the Soundgarden, and they look back to the early 90s for all the rock and roll. But Pearl Jam is kind of seen as this band that's kind of survived. Everybody sees a bunch of dad guys in their mid-50s now. Eddie Vedder has the distinction of being the only one of those icons who is alive in 2021. and not tragically dead at that. So
Right.
for whatever reason, that band normalized, and then they kind of lost their sheen. Well, damn it, we're giving them the sheen back that they deserve.
Chris, do I hear a sound?
Why, yes, you do. Is it the aliens descending? Is it dramatic and spooky? Will the creature from the Black Lagoon soon be in our faces? No, folks, we are just entering the parallel universe. This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report's parallel universe, where we step over to the side, where everything is right, and we make the rules, and we say screw it, and stick it to the man, and we talk about the stuff that we think should be marquee and is awesome and is progressive and is in your face and deserves full coverage. This segment, Parallel Universe, it centers on album reviews, but it does give us a chance to talk about how rock and roll continues to be dynamic, that there are these artists that are continuing to carry that flag and to carry that spirit. In a bit, we'll talk about the spirit of the parallel universe as much as sort of the music and the attitude that comes out of the music. So, Arturo, tell us what you are focusing on here this week in the parallel universe.
Yeah, this is the new or the most recent album by My Morning Jacket. And it's a self-titled album, which is called My Morning Jacket. Now, I will admit I'm kind of cheating a bit here with the parallel universe because MMJ, I'm going to call them MMJ, My Morning Jacket, they're actually a pretty big name band. However, as with St. Vincent, whose most recent album was reviewed on this podcast several months ago, MMJ are a big name artist whom you never hear on the radio, which is ridiculous when you think about it. One Big Holiday from 2003's It Still Moves has all the hallmarks of a classic arena rock anthem. The songs Gideon and Anytime from 2005's Z are tailor-made to come blasting out of the radio. I'm Amazed from 2008's Evil Urges is one of the best pure pop songs that frontman Jim James has ever written.
Yeah, and don't forget about Off the Record. Record.
Yeah, that one as well.
That is the most criminally ignored of those songs.
Yeah. Nevertheless, in the curmudgeonly parallel universe, MMJ are legends. And considering their parallel in the historical timeline, they probably take the place of Nickelback if we're playing the replacement game. Their new self-titled album is Cause for Rejoice because it's easily their best album in more than a decade. Whereas 2011's Circuital was an uneven affair with a few interesting stylistic departures, and 2015's Waterfalls was an underwritten mishmash of overly sentimental slop. The new album is not just a return to form, but a return to the big guitar sound of their cosmic southern rock peak Naughties albums. Lots of solos, lots of reverb, lots of crunch, lots of epicness, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, this is some epic shit.
Yeah. The long time apart from each other, I think, has also resulted in tighter songwriting, oddly enough. Choice tracks, You Have Never in the Real World and In Color are typical My Morning Jacket, like as I would call philosophical power ballads.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Never in the Real World is interesting because it starts off as this, like you said, it's almost like kind of a slow burning soul ballad, and then it just kind of keeps cranking up, at least in the intensity, not the tempo, but the intensity. Yeah. And then at the end, it's just banging, and it's got their best. It definitely has Carl Bremmel and Jim James' best guitar interplay in a long time.
Yeah, it's like layer upon layer of like guitar bravado that somehow avoids machismo. You have The Devils in the Details, which is like a 9-minute weirdo country shuffle that dissolves into like slightly psychedelic, slightly cosmic jazz territory. You have Complex and Penny for Your Thoughts, which bring My Morning Jacket back to one of their stylistic specialties, which is basically driving riff rock that aspires to like gospel-esque emotional heights. So for this old curmudgeon, this album is a tear-inducing, heroic comeback for one of America's most treasured bands, or should be one of America's most treasured bands. And now, for your album, Chris, that you're going to talk about, this kind of really is, it's a parallel universe within a parallel universe.
Yeah.
The next album you're going to talk about is an artist who's literally trying to recreate her back catalog.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is one of the more interesting stories in rock and roll in years. So Taylor Swift, everybody knows Taylor Swift, household name. She sold many, many, many records, and is quite revered by the mainstream rock press, as I'm slowly starting to discover for good reason. And I'll get into that in a second. So she starts her career. Fascinating story. She moves to Nashville when she's 14, and she really gets a training from professional songwriters in Nashville, and has that talent and has that drive. And so she signs at the time in 2006 a 6-record deal with her label at the time to do basically. So it's 12 years and 6 albums that she's going to do, and she does them. And from the first one to the last one, they're all huge hits. They all sell like crazy, especially Red in 1989, obviously being the peak in 2014. So she comes to the end of the contract, and now she's got all the power in the world. And she's like, okay, now I'm going to go on and sign with another of Universal Music Group subsidiary, Republic. And the old label, by the way, was Big Machine Records. And so she signs with Republic. As part of that deal, she gets ownership of her masters, which is quite an accomplishment. Congratulations, Taylor. Here was the problem. She did not own the Big Machine masters. Now, at some point here, I believe it was in 2018 or 2019, Big Machine is bought out by a pure business guy, basically a VC. I don't know if he's private equity VC. A guy named Scooter Braun buys the catalog, basically buys the Big Machine records. Taylor Swift wants her masters, and so Scooter's like, okay, fine, but I'll trade you. You give me another record, and I'll give you an old record. And she was like, screw that. Well, they released a live record without her permission. And then Scooter Braun turns around and sells Taylor Swift's masters for $300 million to a PE company. And so Taylor Swift says, okay, screw you. You own those 6 records of the masters. I'm going to record or re-record all 6. Okay. And so she started doing this earlier this year. She did a re-recording of the album that truly made her famous, Fearless, from 2008. And it was a startling facsimile. They basically brought back all the same people, did the same record, and basically did a note perfect reversion of it. However, with better technology, a few tweaks, and Taylor Swift now, back then she was an 18-year-old girl, or 18, 19. Now she's a 31-year-old woman, and she's singing these doughy-eyed teen breakup songs that at the time, maybe they were universal, but I didn't pay much attention. Why? Because they were doughy-eyed teenage girl bitter breakup songs. Not my genre, not yours either, right, Arturo?
No way.
Right. And so, okay, so that's fine. But then, just in the last month, she released the second of these. And it was a re-release of her most critically celebrated, and really from her hardcore fans, most revered record, 2012's Red. And she's calling these albums Taylor's Version. So this is Red, Taylor's Version. And same exercise.
Basically, the re-recorded spiteful version is what that really means.
Yeah, basically, this is the FU to Scooter Braun. And so the idea is I own these songs. These are my songs, and I'm going to re-record them. And again, she brought back virtually all of the same people, all of the same producers, and basically the same arrangements. But like I said, with a few tweaks. And it is striking when you listen to the old versions of, say, 22 or All Too Well, and some of these, what I'm finding out, are really great songs. And you put them side by side, there are slight differences. The main thing being the depth and feeling of Taylor's voice. It's not quite as kiddish. The big pop song on that is "We're Never Getting Back Together," and at the time it was kind of recorded as maybe not a tongue in cheek, but kind of a bitchy, but like kind of girly, bitchy send off to this boyfriend. Well, on this version, she sounds like, it's almost like she's saying, "Did I mean it back then? Yeah, I meant it." And so now I'm going to say it with even more conviction. And so this idea of taking control of your music, revisiting your music when you're a decade older, and it holds up. So it makes me think that not only was this girl a pro's pro as a songwriter and a singer and just an otherworldly talent, but she just had this sort of extraordinary maturity in what she was saying, and the feeling that she had. All Too Well is getting a lot of attention, especially this week, for a couple of reasons. One, this record has a 10-minute long version of this song, which was condensed to about 5 minutes. This is why we have producers and editors and A&R men, folks, to kind of sometimes save writers, these artists, from themselves. But the 10-minute version is getting attention because it goes off on these. It's angrier and it's more feminist, and it gets really detailed and kind of ugly in a couple of spots as far as the lyrics. So there's a rawness there that she wasn't allowed back then. And then she just put out, and I haven't seen it and I don't want to invest in it, but she made a mini movie based on it, which is one of these now viral hits and talk of the internet and all of that. Additionally, with this record, so that original record was 16 songs. Then they released a deluxe version that had 4 additional songs. And then there was a charity single called Ronen, which is a very good song. And so all in all, back then, there were 21 songs. Well, those 21 songs are here, but she also now brings out 9 songs. Ironically enough, she calls it From the Vault. For all of you curmudgeonly groupies out there, yes, the vault is something that Taylor Swift is now borrowing as a concept. And a couple of these songs were actually recorded by mainstream country artists, and so these are Taylor doing her versions. She's got a duet on there with country superstar Chris Stapleton. So this kind of proves that these are all songs that she wrote as part of this recording process. And maybe at one point, maybe she wanted to do a double record. Thank goodness she didn't, because a lot of this stuff does not hold up in concert or next to the stuff on the record. So main thing here being that we admire Taylor Swift for having the balls to do this, and the fact that she pulls it off. I mean, virtually, it's like note perfect with a little bit better production and deeper singing, but it's the same people, the same arrangements 9 years later, capturing the same magic. That's incredible.
I'll keep this short. I think Red sucks. I honestly, Slater, Taylor Swift has not made any music that I liked until last year. The double shot she did last year with the Folklore and Evermore, where I finally felt like I was listening to a real singer-songwriter, not someone pandering to crappy mainstream country music tastes and silly teenagers. So I respect the fact that she's trying to reclaim I guess some kind of symbolic ownership of her music. That's cool, man. Great. Do it. Do it. I didn't like it the first time. I didn't like it the second time when I heard a little bit of pieces of this. I was like, it's old Taylor Swift music, and I never liked old Taylor Swift. I like modern Taylor Swift. I'd rather listen to, as far as I'm concerned, she starts with folklore. From there on, I'll check her out.
With that, we now leave the parallel universe and we come back to ours. And like we said before, we are starting our Legacy series, and we're starting it with Pearl Jam. Arturo, lead us in.
Let me explain. Yes. Now, with our Prince versus Michael Jackson series coming to an end very soon, this episode that you're listening to now, folks, will mark the beginning of a new ongoing series called A Legacy. Basically, when you see it written out, it'll be the name of the artist / band, ellipses, A Legacy. And in this series, we will take a beloved band or artist of yours truly, Curmudgeons, and do a retrospective analysis of their careers, their albums, their artistic impact and influence, and generally why they mattered in their time and still matter today for younger generations of rock music fans. One of the tenets of this series is that we select a band / artist that isn't typically or normally thought of to have a massive legacy, but they actually do. Hence we avoid the usual names, the Beatles, David Bowie, Nirvana, our beloved Nirvana. We named our podcast after one of their songs, but we're not including those kinds of bands in this Legacy series. So for this maiden episode of the Legacy series, we will go in depth into the career arc, the impact, and the lasting legacy of arguably the greatest and most generation-defining American band of the 1990s, and that is Pearl Jam. Now, the term generation-defining is apt because the argument can be made that Pearl Jam was the last American band that meant as much to their fans. Much like the Grateful Dead kept the hippie dream alive for multiple decades and generations of fans, Pearl Jam continued to fly the flag for anti-conservative establishmentarianism and liberal, socially progressive activist causes. They talked the talk, they walked the walk, and they continue to do so, even when rock music seems to have subsided into a niche musical genre. And more importantly, helping their curmudgeons discuss all things Pearl Jam related is a very special guest. We mentioned his name at the beginning of the show. Ronen Givony, a noted concert promoter and music writer, published a book earlier this year called Not For You, Pearl Jam and the Present Tense, a splendidly written overview of Pearl Jam's career as a recording and touring band that also serves as a delightful meditation on fandom, rock geekiness, and overall musical obsessiveness.
So the end of 2021 is drawing near. It's been a hell of a curmudgeonly journey through this post-COVID era. Or is it pre-COVID? Or is it post-COVID? Anyway, it's about that time where we start contemplating. What were the best popular music albums of the year? My pick for top albums? The list includes efforts from Lucy Dacus and Mdou Mokhtar. Arturo's list? He'll name Genesis Owasu and Idols, among others. Both of us would name Amyl and the Sniffers as one of this year's biggest winners. But what do you think? This is your podcast, after all. Tell us your picks for the albums, songs, and artists of the year. Weigh in by writing to us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or perhaps DM us at curmudgeonpod on Twitter.
The Curmudgeons are very excited in this episode to have.
Woohoo!
Yes, yeah, that was the sound of Arturo Andrade's excitement. We're very excited to have a special guest on with us. We wanted to explore Pearl Jam in an episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and we figured, well, we know that there's somebody out there who has written a very authoritative volume on the band from the perspective of somebody that not only appreciates music and the culture that guys of our age grew up with in the early 90s and since then, but he literally he wrote the book
on this band and knows them intimately, and we just wanted to get him on here. And so, without further ado, we want to introduce everyone to Ronen Givony, the author of Not For You, Pearl Jam, and the Present Tense, which is available on Bloomsbury Academic now for everyone to read. Ronen, hello.
Hello. Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
No, we definitely appreciate you being on here. And so just to get started, I guess we'll keep this sort of open-ended. Not For You, Pearl Jam in the Present Tense. In the beginning of the book, you say that the idea for this book and the start of this project resulted from a bit of a communal experience that you had seeing the band, I believe, at Wrigley Field in 2016. So if you could take us just through first, who you are, your background, how you came to appreciate and follow Pearl Jam as fervently as you have, and then, what you intended with this book and what it's about.
So first, thank you for the very kind introduction, and again for having me on. I would say, the short way to put it, I'm a child of the 90s, like you guys. I was born in 1978 and was a teenager, 13, 14 years old, when the first Pearl Jam record came out and the first few videos, came on MTV. I was in high school, when Pearl Jam Unplugged and Nirvana Unplugged and Siamese Dream and In Utero and all these classic records came out. And, I work in music. My day job was in classical music, which is a different story. I can get into that. But I'm a rock person. I had seen Pearl Jam many times, and I wrote a book that came out in 2016. It was a volume in the 33 1/3 series, which, as you probably know, is short books about kind of classic albums. I wrote about this cult punk rock band called Jawbreaker. And just basically as I turned the book in and was kind of gratuitously, rewarding myself for just getting the manuscript out, I went to Chicago with my friend and went to see a pair of shows and was just kind of hanging out in the, in the field. And as I talk about in the very beginning, I had an encounter which, is kind of not that uncommon, I think, at Pearl Jam, at least in my experience, which is just that, I'm a kind of short, soft-spoken Jewish guy, and there are many, soft-spoken, short Jewish guys at Pearl Jam, but there's also lots of, cops and firefighters and jocks and, Republicans, and the one thing I think you can say about Pearl Jam is that it's it's people from pretty different backgrounds, working class people, middle class people, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, all just kind of side by side. And I had this kind of light bulb go off in my head, like right before the band took the stage, which was just that, first, how funny it is that Pearl Jam is this kind of band that, I feel like you can see a band like Radiohead, you can see, a band like the Arcade Fire, and for better or worse, like, you can kind of look around and see many people who kind of look like you. And yet, at Pearl Jam, I feel like you're just as likely to literally be standing or sitting next to someone who, is just from a very different walk of life. And so as I was kind of thinking that, I realized that, just having done the book, there's something like 10 or 15 books, I think, by now about Nirvana and Kurt Cobain. There's something like 5 or 7 books about, like, Metallica and Green Day and I really like all these bands. I grew up with all these bands, but it always just struck me as weird that there had been one book that came out about the band in 1998. There was a really good kind of authorized coffee table book that came out for the documentary, but really there was no like treatment. I thought serious treatment about the band. And so anyway, at that show in Chicago in 2016, which, obviously I had no way of knowing at the time, would end up being like really one of their last handful of shows for a good long time. I just thought, wow, like the 40,000 people in this venue and really like the 2 million people that they played to all year, like they just deserve like an honest, I don't know, like look at this band. And not that I'm maybe the person to do it, but I was like, I should just give it a shot.
No, and no, that is interesting. And, we had considered that. I know that there's a couple of volumes about the history of grunge. Greg Prato just released a book on Soundgarden. Charlie Cross released his book on Nirvana 20 years ago. Everett True, you have all of those, Michael Azerrad, all that, but Pearl Jam, you're right. I mean, their music, I know at one point you say in the book that you believe that Pearl Jam stands as the artist of the decade, that no one had a 5 album streak that spanned the decade quite like they did. And I'm inclined to agree with you. And so why does that not get more serious treatment? Because they sold 1 million, they had the nerve to sell 1 million records in 1 week and get a bunch of frat boys at their concerts. I mean, it just seems awfully punitive. And so I guess that's a way of saying that we appreciate the effort. Speaking of effort, it sounds like it took a hell of a lot of effort. It sounds like you really dove in to all of these sources, and so the book kind of reads like a love story between you and all of your source material in some respects.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, it took about 4 years from, I guess, that day in Chicago to the day I finally, sent off the proofs and like got a vacation. And I have to say, like, the book changed a lot during that time. Like I originally thought that I had a pretty good idea of just like how it should be told. Like, I thought I knew the story pretty well. I knew like kind of the dramatic parts, but the structure that it ultimately took, which is kind of those 30, vignettes, like it was really born out of, I want to say, like, partly like the experience of writing the book and more so like even trying to sell it, by which I mean, like, the point that you mentioned earlier about like, like Pearl Jam, kind of like, why are there 10 books about Nirvana and only 1 book about Pearl Jam? If you had heard some of the responses I got, from editors and publishers, like, it was really eye-opening, because I would say on the one hand, like, okay, Pearl Jam was like a very divisive band circa 1994, 1995, 1996. To a certain extent, like, anyone who is around them, like, they're still like, like some people are like, hell no. And some people are like, yes, like for life. The other thing, which like I found surprising, maybe you guys do or don't, like, I definitely got 1 or 2 questions from editors to the effect of like, let's be honest, like, do Pearl Jam people buy books? By which he really meant, like, by which he really meant, like, let's be honest, do Pearl Jam people even read? You know what I mean? Like, and I like, and I realized, like, wow, like, you're like a liberal New York dude, like, with sneakers on, and if this is your opinion about like 51% of the country, like, you can see why a lot of other stuff in this country is going on. You know what I mean? So it was that I learned.
I mean, if I can chime in a bit here, going back to something that you said earlier, Ronen, about the eclecticism of a Pearl Jam audience. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, why Pearl Jam is still there and why they're still huge. And they can sell out any arena in the country, any amphitheater. They're there. Is because, and I think you hinted at it. They transcend social and sometimes even ethnic boundaries. Like you said, you go to a Pearl Jam show, you can find, short, intellectual, liberal guys like us. You can find cops, you can find jocks, blah, blah, blah. Pearl Jam kind of transcended those boundaries. And the band that I would compare them to in that regard, a lot of people may not agree. To me, it's pretty obvious. It's the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead were like that band. And when they started out, they were the hippie jam band for hippies and burnouts. But as the years went on, as the decades rolled on, their audience expanded like Pearl Jam's did. And it became more inclusive. The Dead's fan base, you'll get hippies, but you'll get cops, you'll get Republicans, you'll get conservatives there as well who just love the music. Yeah. And they love the atmosphere. And Pearl Jam is the band that really, they're the last of that ilk, of that kind of band, unless you want to count Fish, because Fish really were a direct, hippie jam band. But like I'm talking about the soul of it all.
Question for you, Ronen: was the person at the publisher who said that, was he younger than us, older than us?
He was around our age. I mean, and
okay,
yeah, I mean, but I have to say, age aside, or even background aside, I think it's a fair question. If you're pitching a book about Radiohead, that's one thing. If you're pitching a book about Pearl Jam, for some reason, I don't know, they started, almost exactly around the same time. Their fans overlap so much, and yet Radiohead, any publisher would be like, oh yeah, obviously, that's the kind of band that their fans buy books. Pearl Jam, I had to explain to them, I was like, look, here's how it works. The people who have seen the band 150 times, they show up at the venue first. I was like, they're there 8 hours ahead of time to buy posters and t-shirts. And I was like, whether they will agree with my book or not, they, chances are they will buy it, because either they want to argue with it or they want to support it. You know what I mean? But I was like, this is not a casual fan base. And, and I'm sitting across from someone, and I'm like, you would think just on the level of capitalism, you'd be motivated to pursue this audience that has had nothing kind of thrown its way. But it's just one of the things you learn, writing a book like that, the response out in the real world has been so much more positive and organic than sure. That guy thought. And he couldn't have known that, because he's never been to a show. He's never,
right.
The people have, so anyway.
Yeah. But the better question to ask, instead of asking, that guy who rejected the idea for the book, how old is he? No, the better question to ask, what kind of music does this guy listen to? Yeah. That's the better question.
Well, great point.
Yeah.
So his question to me was, what's your beef with the Chili Peppers?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's the thing with and we'll get into this in a bit. But one point is that, to me, that it became over time, when this whole thing first started, Nirvana hit number one, as you point out. It takes the place of Michael Jackson's Dangerous, number one. Our previous episode, we actually talked about that. But they hit at the same time. And when we lived through it, it was Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I love both records, but 10 was much more of a passion for me. I loved In Utero, but Versus and Vitalogy was much more of a passion for me. And I think what's happened is, whether it's the mass media overlords, and coincidentally, I was a journalist for 10 years, mostly music before I went to law school. So, I mean, it kind of takes one to know one. I think what happened was it was this notion where Pearl Jam faded, and, obviously because of what happened with Cobain and their music. Obviously, the best albums of that grunge era are Nevermind and In Utero. Just objectively, they're the best. But the Pearl Jams, it used to be Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and then for some reason, by like a decade later, it had turned into a Nirvana or Pearl Jam, and Pearl Jam fell way off because of maybe of some of the attrition that of the binaural riot act era. But for whatever reason, they just didn't get the same long-term level of respect. One of the vibes I get through the book, and I think you say it a few times, is that Pearl Jam is a product of its time and its place and of the collective experience of our generation and of the culture. And you contemplate this idea of if they had hit 5 years earlier or 5 years later than 1991, given all the context of where society was and where the music business was, would it have hit quite as well? And I come away when I read the book. I mean, you have a chapter where you kind of marry what happened to the Who in Cincinnati in 1979 with what happened to Pearl Jam in Denver in 2000. It seems to me that this idea of time plus place plus experience can be the story of any band and any community of fans relationship with any band. And so to me, that when you say the publisher was like, I don't get this, it's like, well, plug in any band and that'll be the story of any community out there.
Right.
So
no, I think that's really well said. Like, when I was researching this and kind of writing the early chapters, one thing I found, which I really did not know about, was, you kind of like, the popular narrative is what, like, heavy metal in the 80s, and then grunge comes along and kind of, dislodges it, and there's a regime change. But in reading about like 1988, 89, 1990, like there were all these things going on that kind of don't really fit that mold. And, Jane's Addiction is I think kind of like the most natural fit for this story because the guys were such fans of theirs. But, I think it was 1989 or 1990, if I'm not mistaken, in LA, when Depeche Mode, when their record Violator came out, there was, there was like a riot, I think, in downtown LA, with like 25,000 people and like helicopters overhead. And, and I think like, I was, there's footage of this. There's a really good Depeche Mode documentary. Like you could just as easily make the case that this is like, the birth of alternative in America. You know what I mean? Like there's a narrative where it goes like Depeche Mode, Jane's Addiction, Nine Inch Nails, like that kind of more gothic strain. And those bands were also like playing arenas and stadiums. And so, they're like, like what you're talking about, like even 5 years, even 1 or 2 years, like, if Jane's Addiction came out in 1992, like maybe they would have made 5 more records. You know what I mean? Like, so it's all quite contingent. And I think especially in Pearl Jam's case, like just the serendipity of it and the magic of it, like really worked out in a way that like, you couldn't have planned it that way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're like the perfect band to rise up in the Bill Clinton rock the vote time period there. So one thing to ask you about, Ronen, and maybe kidding with you here a little bit, you start the book off by kind of self-deprecatingly telling the other super fans that you've only seen 57 shows. And so this idea of the ranking of the super fans, and you also make reference to your fandom as being a guilty pleasure. How do you see this? I mean, is this something that is a little bit of a hidden passion of yours? And how do those super, like if you meet somebody that's been to 150 shows, how have they reacted to this book?
I mean, I have a few friends who have seen 100+ shows, and including one of whom I wrote about. She kind of was really helpful in just being like, this is what works and what doesn't. I like a lot of it, is humor or trying to be. I think like I kind of like books that are just ambivalent about subjects. I think that like it's fun to read a book that is positive or negative, but it's something about like I don't know, like for me, my favorite artists and my favorite writers, my favorite bands, like there's very few people I feel completely unconflicted about, and I think it's just like a product of like having lived with them and having like come to appreciate their strengths and their faults. In the case of Pearl Jam, I mean, like we were talking earlier about being cool, right? I think that that's just kind of the easiest question. Like, is Pearl Jam a cool band? In the real world, like, yeah, they're a rock and roll band. They're famous, and they get to play to 20,000 people, and that's cool. Like, but if you go to like music critics and like Pitchfork and I don't know, like indie rock world, and like, is a big lumbering white rock band like cool? Like, I don't know, in some ways that's like the most uncool thing that's imaginable right now. Like I don't know, I find that like the people who are in the audience, maybe I'm mistaken about this, but like I find Pearl Jam fans to be like less conflicted than me, like, which is part of what I like about it.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of the guy who's there like grumpy and has his arms crossed and like wishes they would get to the obscure B-side, like and there are like annoying cranky people like that in the crowd, but honestly I think that that's kind of what Eddie Vedder is, you know what I mean? Like I think that when he's watching The Who and when he's watching Pete Townsend, like he knows exactly like the frequency of the B-side that's being played, and I just think that that's like a form of love, like
yes,
in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, like, when I you were talking earlier about the Dead, like I when I was writing this, I really made sure to just try to read as much as I could about like reading books about the Grateful Dead, reading books about the Who, reading books about Bruce Springsteen and Neil Young, and just to see like how either it's like a straight up kind of saint's life where it's like everything they do is great and miraculous, or it's like character assassination, and I was like there has to be like just a middle road between being like they did some great stuff, they did some so-so stuff, and like let's just weigh the balance.
Yeah. I think that's the same thing. Like, I mean, Neil Young is my guy, and I mean, he's the one that I probably dig in the crates for most as far as tapes and shows and things like that. And having been to a few shows of his, I think it's the same thing. It's this idea of, what ride is he going to take me on? And, is he going to play like, Don't Be Denied, or is he going to play like something from Trans on acoustic guitar and these types of things? And so it's, when you go to see the magician, you want to see the magic. So for you, is this book well, I guess one way to phrase it is, what was the most surprising thing for you about learning about writing this book? I mean, what did you learn the most? And I don't know, I get this sense when I read the book, it's almost like a dialectic between I'm telling a narrative about the band, but then also a narrative about being part of the community that cares this much about the band. And so it's this, it's almost like you're telling us about your excitement about the Pink Pop show in 1992, right, as much as about Pink Pop, or your, again, there's context. My favorite paragraph in the entire book is Yield dropped. They did this radio show, and oh, by the way, 2 days later, Bill Clinton denied having sexual relations with that woman. And so this idea of, okay, so what was happening and where can we put this in, and all of that. So I think it's a very unique exercise. But being the guy that did the exercise, I mean, I guess, what did you get most out of it, and what did you learn the most from it that maybe you didn't expect to?
Yeah, so I would say, I really tried to do my diligence in terms of just listening to bootlegs and almost going like day by day through their early career, just because with them, as a writer, it's such a gift, like there's websites where literally 1,300 shows are archived, and you can just listen to any of them like at any time. And so, that's just something that I felt like I had, like if I were writing this book in 1998, like you can be forgiven for only having access to a few bootlegs or whatever. But right now, like there's no excuse, you know what I mean? Like it's on you. So I really tried to listen to every show, like in 93, 94, 95. And one thing I learned, this is a little inside baseball, I guess, but like, the narrative about them at the time was always like, that the wheels were coming off the bus, and like they were, hours away from breaking up, and like Eddie Vedder was on suicide watch, and like that it was crazy, and just listening to those tapes and really like I mean, they were just on fire, for one. Like the band, I mean, like in 93, 94, it's just like this, like almost fearsome machine. Like, but there were, like of the, I don't know, let's say 150 shows that they played, there were maybe 2 or 3, I would say, where there were incidents, and those were the ones I wrote about. But like, it's amazing how those got magnified to the point where people were really worried about them, and really like, sure that they were going to break up. And I guess it's a sign of just like how much people cared at the time, like, like that there was such scrutiny about them. So that was like surprising. Just like, I mean, always that things get hyped up, but they were just like, I don't know, doing their job and trying to play shows and keeping their head down. And a lot of that was quite overstated. The other thing I would say is just, I knew all along that that they're not the kind of band that's going to sit down with me for an 8-hour interview. You know what I mean? Like, and so I knew that like there were facts in the public domain, and then there were things that I could interpret, and there were things I could kind of argue. But, you have to remember with them too, like, their story is a little bit uneven, right? Because like they're a band that's been around for 3 decades. And in their first decade, there was quite a bit of drama. There was just, people coming in and out, and stardom and all that. And then like, I would say after, I don't know, 2004, 5, 6, they more or less like get the ship steered straight, and they're basically like a functional rock band. And so the drama, I think, at least from 2006, 7 onward, it's not there in the same way. And so you just kind of have to figure out like, how do you proportion a 30-year story?
Yeah, exactly. And so it seems to me that, like you said, I think it was like 2001, 2002, and either it was just changing tastes, and like you said, I think pretty much after 2000, the dawn of the dusk of the white boy rock bands had come, and they, like you said, they settle down and become they become a big rock band, a big stable rock band. And so
they basically became elder statesmen.
Yes, they basically became elder statesmen. And so now the story with them is basically about the community and about those moments where they sort of did intersect with the culture, as in the stuff that happened in Uniondale, or some of the things that came up, intermittently in those 15 years. Hey, one question for you. are you aware if this band or if this book has gotten back to the band, or if anybody's read it, or have you gotten any feedback from their camp about their impression of what you produced?
Yeah, no word back from base camp. However, weirdly, like multiple people that I have met and kind of sent the book to were like, oh, I sent a copy to Jeff, or I sent a copy to Stone. So, and I was very flattered that Easy Street Records in Seattle, has it displayed there and was selling it, and, tweeted about it and all that. So, would I love to have gotten 2 minutes of feedback? Sure. Like, did I think that was ever on the table? Not so much, but I at the end of the day, I think it was more for I don't know, the fans, and when I sent it off, I was like, if I had another year to do this, like, I'm sure it would look differently than result, but I felt like it was an honest book, and I felt like sure. There were things that I was positive about and things that I was less positive about. So, I think that's just the best you can do.
On this episode, we started a new series that explores certain bands/artists' influence and legacy with Pearl Jam, a legacy. For the next episode, yours truly, Curmudgeons, will get bolder and actually defend a band that started their careers being trashed by rock critics for allegedly being Pearl Jam clones. This is, of course, Stone Temple Pilots. This will be the first episode in another series of the Curmudgeon Rock Report called In Defense Of, where we take bands or albums that are either critically derided or commercially ignored and argue for their worth. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
So again, folks, we're here with Ronen Givony. We're talking about both the band Pearl Jam and about his terrific book, Not For You, Pearl Jam in the Present Tense. We'd like to take a little bit of a run through Pearl Jam's history and the actual albums. And
absolutely,
I'll defer to Arturo to lead that discussion with you, Ronen.
The story of Pearl Jam kind of really is the story of the whole Seattle rock scene in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, just in that, 3/5 of the band, I guess, were just Seattle natives, and I think this is one of the coolest parts of the story is, on paper, Pearl Jam was an instant success story, but then right. Once you a little deeper, Jeff Amen and Stone Gossard had, not one, but two bands and many years in, the minor leagues, working and honestly failing and almost thinking of quitting.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, it's interesting how it goes because with Green River, they were flat out underground band. Right. And it's interesting. You mentioned Jane's Addiction as one of those, one of the bands that made alternative rock into the mainstream, and they were. I'm a big Jane's Addiction fan myself, but Jeff Ament in multiple interviews, he said that one of the demarcation points of the breakup of Green River is when the members of Green River went to see Jane's Addiction live, and how Mark Arm, the lead singer of Green River, hated it, absolutely hated Jane's Addiction. And Jeff and Stone are there watching, what are you talking about? This band's great. And that was,
no, I mean, that's a perfect example where, I have mixed feelings about Mark Arm and Mudhoney. I kind of respect him, or I would like to respect him, but, if you saw Jane's Addiction in 1989 and you're like, this sucks, then yeah, I can see why you might not be in a band with Jeff and Stone for very long.
Yeah. I mean, I've always felt Jane's Addiction was kind of an underrated influence on Pearl Jam musically, especially in the 10 era. And then Green River, broke up. Mark Arm went on to do Mudhoney, who I personally love. I'm a big Mudhoney fan. But then, you had Mother Love Bone, which is, I kind of agree with you. I don't think Mother Love Bone was ever that good, except for like a few Andrew Wood ballads. But the interesting thing about them, and I find it kind of, I don't know if you feel the same way, if you've heard Malfunction or not. Andrew Wood's first band was Malfunction, and they were basically grunge Kiss. It was basically taking glam metal, but like doing with a really cheeky, tongue-in-cheek, ironic twist to it. Andrew being Landrew, the love god, and his whole on stage shtick. It was always kind of lampooning that stuff. But then that band, he left that band to join Jeff and Stone with Mother Love Bone, and they genuinely tried to be a genuine glam metal band, a la LA 1980s. I mean, I've always wondered if you thought that's such a strange dichotomy.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Kiss, I think, was the most important band for all these guys. And that's kind of where, I mean, Pearl Jam is considered uncool now for very different reasons. But at the time, they were considered kind of the suburban, heavy metal dudes, that came out, when Chains and Soundgarden, Nirvana, all that were happening. So, but again, this is kind of what is great about them. They were yeah, this is us. You know what I mean? Eddie Vedder, sometimes, you kind of hear him saying yeah, I was into the Ramones and I was into stuff like this. Jeff and Stone were no, we were listening to Kiss. You know what I mean?
And Aerosmith.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of funny how Mother Love Bone really was trying to be the Seattle Poison. And they were taking that, they were going that we're going for it, man. And we're party rockers. And then Andrew Wood dies of an overdose. And then all of a sudden everything changes. And I was wondering, from one Pearl Jam fan to another, Ronen, and we've all heard Mother Love Bone. We're not big fans. We all thought they were kind of crappy, glam metal. But after Andrew Wood died, the music that especially Gossard started writing really changed. And it got darker, a little more serious. It's almost as if the band, him and Ahmet, just did a 180 in their approach and their philosophy toward music. Yeah, we're going to make it. We're going to be rock stars with party rock. Your lead singer dies. Oh, wait a minute. We got to do something different now. I mean, did you ever get that sense with them?
100%. I mean, I think that both, having your good friend and bandmate die, and also, I think you can't forget, by this point, I think these guys were 6, 7, 8 years into their career, you know what I mean? Which more than most bands are around, and,
right.
And I think not many people would have, most people would have understood if they were you know what, I've been in 8 years, I'm going to go apply to law school, go to med school, whatever. That's what people do when they're in their 20s, mid 20s, and to their and I think Jeff actually was doing that. Jeff was I think he was pretty close. I think if Stone had not been writing those songs, I who can say, but it's this gear that certain people kick into, and I think that the drama in that moment is fully embedded in those songs.
And here's my take on that era. So all of the music that Gossard and then Ament were writing during that interim period that got to Eddie on that famous tape that made its way down there to San Diego, and the stuff that shows up on Temple of the Dog, and the Footsteps of the World, and all of those early things, they never were really in that pocket again. There's a tempo, there's a drama, there's a pathos, there's a depth and a texture, not just to the arrangements, but also just the riffs and the music itself. And one of our favorite, Arturo and I, we talk a lot about them a lot on our podcast, is Built to Spill. And Doug Marsh, the lead singer of Built to Spill, he had an interview back when Perfect From Now On was coming out, and he was talking about the pressure he felt, and he was looking back at the album that kind of put them on that radar. There's nothing wrong with love, and he was saying that when you don't know for sure that people are going to actually hear your music outside of your friends, it makes a huge difference. So this idea that they were writing from their hearts, maybe they were coping with the loss of Andrew Wood and that indecision, and this pivot point for all of those guys there. Because I'm sure, several of those bands, Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, they were probably in some ways in the same kind of pivot point. Is this going to work or not? And so I think maybe some of that music was born from that emotional state, and they just happened to find like the perfect lead singer, and the world's most wonderful happy accident happens, and this synergy explodes from maybe what was Gossard and Ament running their form of poetry. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, quite frankly, I wish I could have stolen that when I was writing it. It's probably a lot more elegant way than I put it. But no, I mean, I can't really say it better. Like there's an innocence and just kind of a lack of
self-consciousness.
Exactly. I mean, just about how it's going to be heard, and I love that Doug Marsh said that too, because think about that. Like Doug Marsh is right. Like he had pressure from Warner Brothers for Perfect from Now On and Keep It Like a Secret. Pearl Jam had to follow up 10 and Verses. You know what I mean? Like so, think about like those different levels of pressure. But yeah, I mean, like Verses and Vitology, like what would a psychiatrist say? You know what I mean? It's like it's someone who's under constant surveillance. Like that's what those records are, and it's in the lyrics and in the chords and in the riffs and I guess like one thing I like about bands that kind of stick around is like as you say, like your first record, no one is looking, no one is listening, so you're just kind of freed. But you would think that like 25, 30 years in, like, I mean, people are watching Pearl Jam, but the pressure is off in a way, like, and that's why, like, I feel like there are artists, David Bowie and Leonard Cohen are like the obvious examples, but again, like at the end of their career, no one was really expecting them to do anything great. And so it kind of comes back around again. And that's kind of like, like, this is not a comment about Gigaton, but I'm always like, what if like their best record is actually their last one? You know what I mean? Like it's not impossible.
Yeah. No, with them it's not. And it's interesting you mentioned Gigaton. It's gotta be it's definitely the first record since Yield to have a tolerable last third, and it's probably the best last third of a record since Vitalogy. So who knows? Maybe they are getting to that point where they're going to have a glorious third act.
Yeah. Ronen, I want to talk to you about jumping off on I guess the quote unquote attitude adjustment that Gossard and Ament had after Andrew Wood died. And I want to connect this to Eddie Vedder, because when Vedder joined the band, when he was in San Diego, I mean, he was languishing in all these phony Chili Pepper, bad funk rock bands, right? And he got the call up, he joined the band. And one thing Pearl Jam detractors have always accused Eddie Vedder of is being contrived, being calculated in his, his dark, grim, image. And me personally, I've always felt, yeah, so what? It's yes, I mean, he's an artist. He's a serious artist. Pearl Jam's a serious band making serious music, and his artistry comes from his soul. But at the same time, it's show business. What's wrong with putting up a little bit of an image? Because Andrew Wood was like a Freddie Mercury disciple. Vedder's coming into a band where the old singer was that. And if I'm Vedder, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be the 180-degree opposite. If he was Freddie Mercury, I'm going to be Jim Morrison. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that kind of image adjustment. I think it adds to the art. Me personally, what do you think, Ronen?
You're basically getting, I think, to the heart of like why people found Eddie Vedder so fascinating and frustrating and still an object of interest 30 years later. It's like in rock and roll, it's this weird contradiction, isn't it? It's like David Bowie's name was not David Bowie, Joe Strummer's name was Joe Strummer, but these were all personas, and yet in Joe Strummer's case and Eddie Vedder's case, like the reason why people connect with them is because they're basically bleeding into the microphone. It's their authenticity and it's their heart. So you say to yourself, how can this guy like put so much of his heart on the line singing Black, and yet how can he be such a phony, like in terms of like whether he likes videos or not? I think like I didn't really write about this because I this would all be speculation, but I think like like in a weird way, like, George W. Bush was like a master at being underestimated. Like every time somebody said that he was dumb, like he got his way. Ed is kind of that way too. Like, I think like he kind of plays up his like whatever, like fake idiocy a little bit, but he's really quite shrewd. Like, I think like that, like, he's a child actor. He knows how he comes across on camera. And I think that like, especially at that time, the early 90s, you weren't really expected to be like a super media savvy celebrity, like when Bob Dylan was like, ducking and playing with all these reporters, that that celebrities aren't supposed to do that. You're supposed to be like nice and smile and just answer your thing. And I think like Ed was just doing his version of that.
And I think there's something to be said also, like for in all cultures in traditional folk art, the mask allows you to be more honest.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of people, who accuse Vedder of this don't get, that he's being as honest as he possibly can. And he can't do this as Eddie Mueller. He's got to do it as Eddie Vedder, but that's just, my thing. But anyway, Ronen, okay. So 10 comes out. It's a slow but steady rise to iconic status. The band becomes superstars and generational spokesmen, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I remember where I was when I first heard Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit and watched the video for the first time. It changed me. It really fundamentally changed me. I remember where I was when I first heard Pearl Jam's Alive on the radio in Miami, living in Miami Beach, listening to Zeta. Do you remember where you were when you first heard Pearl Jam?
Probably like 30 minutes up on a side from you. Like,
Broward County, baby. Did you hear him on the radio, or did you see him on MTV? Or
no, definitely MTV. I mean, and I think that like just by nature of your question, you're if I'm understanding you right, I mean like that moment, like it was only partly the fact that it was like 10 classic records coming out in 1991. It was also the fact that, like, I'm guessing it was similar in your school, like, where I went to high school in suburban Broward County, like, you go to school, you hang out with your friends, you go back home, and then you turn on MTV. Like, and it wasn't like the artsy kids did that and like the goth kids did that. Everybody did that. Like, that was just what it was, just like, and so I it was this moment when like technology and commerce and economics were just conspiring to like, put this music on your doorstep to the point where like, it was just hard not to have an opinion, about back, 9 Inch Nails, whatever, because that was true popular culture at the time. It was mass culture.
Yes.
And again, like, that worked out really well for some people. And, I'm sure there were times in the 90s when Pearl Jam wishes they weren't, on MTV every 5 minutes. So the medium was, I think, inseparable from just the music. And if, like, if that had happened in 2001, I wonder how many of those bands, would have broken through.
Yeah, no, that's true because the internet had made things diffuse by then. One point to make with Pearl Jam. So I'm from Syracuse, New York, and it was the same experience with us. It was, everybody was watching MTV, and everybody, and that was kind of what was informing us. So I remember Nirvana kind of snuck in. It was like this, it was whatever. I remember because like Alice in Chains' Man in the Box hit the equivalent of whatever TRL was at that point. First, Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit sneaks in there, and I'm like, okay, didn't really phase me at first. Then it kind of snuck up on me. And
it bulldozed me, man. It fucking killed me when I first saw that video and heard that song. The combination of the video and the audio, like Nirvana, changed my life.
No, and it ended up changing mine too, because once I finally figured out, oh, okay, this is pretty good, I went out and bought the disc. First spin of the disc blew me away. Immediately listened to it. It was around that time, the beginning of January, that Alive went into rotation. And that caught my attention. I said, that's a pretty good song. I would like be listening to MTV while I was doing my homework or whatever. It was, and you point out in the book that Pearl Jam owes a lot of their success and a lot of their explosion to how they presented the music in a context outside of the pre-recorded album 10. The Unplugged show. That's what got me. And went out and bought the disc. And for 2 years, I was obsessed with that disc. And I was obsessed with their music. I was obsessed with Unplugged. They played the Video Music Awards there in 1992. Mesmerizing stuff. And, I started to, they were the first band, I think, ever that I really sought out live recordings from. Back when, there was this thing that they used to call trading tapes. That's how I got started on trading tapes. But anyway, so I think that's it. So we all remember where we were, and it was formative. But for them, I can't remember another band that used MTV to present their music in a way other than through the videos and the pre-recorded stuff. That them getting an Unplugged 2 months after coming onto the scene, where it took Nirvana almost 2 years. I think you hit that right on the head there.
Yeah, I think that was a coup for them, and I think it's one of those decisions probably that there was probably they probably agreed to it before they had even thought about it. And I'm sure if a year had gone by and then they asked them to do Unplugged, they probably would have said no. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I agree. That performance for me was life changing. And I mean, I had 10, and I was just one of those people who listened to a bootleg of Unplugged. You know what I mean? So, and it holds up still. It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then even the video for Even Flow is a live recording, which is way better. And I'm kind of with you, by the way, that 10 is one of those records that I know, Eddie makes that comment like, oh yeah, that's a thing we did. Or I think it's Jeff Ament or something like that, that a lot of good songs on the record. Not a it hasn't aged well. Let's put it that way.
Well, I disagree with that, Chris. I think it's aged pretty well. I mean, I think it's a cultural artifact of its time. And if you look at it in that way, I don't think it has aged. I don't think it has aged badly. If you look at it in that perspective, the way I would see the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, something like that would never come out now, but it's of its time. It defined its time. In a way, it kind of makes it timeless in that sense, in my opinion. I guess it's just backwards way I see things. Yeah, but anyway, after the 10 period, we go into the Versus, Vitalogy, No Code, 1993 to 96 period, which is basically, Pearl Jam's pushback period, right? They're not doing videos. They're fighting Ticketmaster to get ticket prices down. And Ronen, I'm wondering if you agree with me in this. Around this time, Pearl Jam started shedding some of their old casual fans, and in my personal opinion, the dude bro jock element, a lot of that they started cutting out in this period, by being just more overtly political and outspoken in their, in their progressive liberal social issue stances.
Oh, I agree with you that the pairing of the audience certainly happened around that time, around 94, 95. I would also say, like, in addition to the politics, which, as you know, like really kind of kicks in around Vitology and Versus, sonically too, they just became like kind of an abrasive band, they like all the interludes on Vitology, all the kind of wayward jams, like I have grown to appreciate those, but like closing a record with a 9-minute tape collage piece, like that's a very self-consciously repellent move, and like I admire that, but they knew what they were doing, and I salute them.
Anyway, Ronen, another question. All these fights that Pearl Jam picked, Ticketmaster, all the other stuff, and around that, why do you think they picked all these fights that they themselves, and they're not dumb guys, they're pretty smart guys, they probably knew they couldn't win these fights, and yet they chose this road less traveled that they had to know would have killed them, and did eventually kind of kill them as a major radio marquee stadium act. It seems like this kind of defiant independent streak and the lack of ambiguity as to causes, it eventually served them well, I guess, as far in the long term. But why do you think back then they chose that way?
Well, I mean, I think personally it was not like a foregone conclusion in 1995 that the world's most powerful rock band could go to bat with Ticketmaster and get completely shut down. I think that that was a little bit of a surprise. I think that they definitely knew that they were stepping into a big fight. I think they knew that it would be quite costly. I think that at a minimum they spent a couple $100,000 on legal fees. But I think that, they had power. They had a voice, they had a platform, they had, an issue too. They I think that now we have all just kind of raised the white flag and we pay our $15 in Ticketmaster service fees, and even Pearl Jam works through them. But at the time, there was a minute, I think, where there was a real question, like, why can't the biggest band in the world just book its own tour? Like now, you would like that infrastructure is a little bit different. And as a concert producer, like I found that part of the story really interesting, but it's, you think about it, like right now you have Google and Facebook and Live Nation and all these places, like these corporations seem invincible. In 1995, like, I don't think they Ticketmaster was not as entrenched a force, and yet it was not even close, I think Pearl Jam admitted themselves. So, I think that it's they could have, you're right, like just made life easy for themselves. They could have just done the tour, made a lot of money and not made a fuss. They could have just taken themselves off the road and done that too. But I think that that's why they have so much goodwill among their fans, is like they stood for something, and they
makes
lost.
sense. Makes sense. Related question, Ronen, since I know you said you do concert production and are familiar with that, I'm just curious. We know that in terms of artist power, distribution, those types of things, the internet has tended to be a pretty great equalizer here over the last 20 or so years. What effect, like, let's say that they wanted to pick up this fight in 2002, could they have figured out a way, reasonably to promote themselves? I know that, like, again, this is before, Clear Channel became Live Nation, became iHeart and all this kind of stuff. But would the internet have led to a path I guess more straightforward, since you're there, did the internet fundamentally change the concert production business, or is it sort of the same model that's always been there?
Well, one thing I know when they set up, in 1995, when they did the Ticketmaster thing, or the anti-Ticketmaster tour, they did set up their own ticketing startup, and I'm pretty sure there's a Guinness Book of World Records statistic where they handled the most phone calls in one day. There was something I don't know, tens of thousands of just phone lines that they had to arrange for. It's mind-boggling to think but yeah, so I think that if they had online ticketing, I think a lot of the things that we just take for granted, security and but again, think about it, why is it that after 75 years of popular music, it takes, I don't know, 5 guys who, from punk / indie backgrounds, in a working class city, to say what, maybe there should be more than one way to do a concert, and if anything, it again, we're in New York, especially every, when I moved here in 2004, there were indie promoters, there were DIY shows, there were places you could see things where you didn't have a Ticketmaster ticket. Now everything is Live Nation or AEG. And again, this is Pearl Jam has, to their credit, I think they don't really draw much attention to themselves about this, but they were so far ahead of the curve that we just now you do Ticketmaster, or you do a little rinky-dink startup and kind of cross your fingers and hope that but it's it's a lot less further along than you think it is. And
wow.
And to your point about the internet kind of equalizing things, yeah, you can say a young band can get their record out, and they can have a website up, and they can be heard in a way that wasn't true in 1992. But you could also say Spotify and YouTube, have they really equalized things for people, or have they kind of made things really good for the blockbuster?
Well, yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Spotify is one instance. It's a strange thing. You end up on Spotify, and I remember Lou Reed had a comment before he died that said he had gotten the lowest royalty check since he was 14 playing the ice cream shop on Long Island. But then you have the other extreme, which is the Lil Nas X thing, where right time, right place. You buy a beat for $50. You put something out on TikTok or SoundCloud or something, and voila, a month later, you're a millionaire. So I think that there is this sort of, the internet can give you great distribution. It can put you out there, but it does seem like kind of a crapshoot whether or not it's going to put you in the financial birdseat, or it's going to give you the actual power. So I don't know. It's an interesting divide.
Yeah, it really is. But as I said, Pearl Jam, toward the end of the 90s, they kind of got out of that. They kind of sort of made peace with Ticketmaster, and then they kind of their quote unquote imperial phase. It ends with what I think is the really extremely underrated and overlooked Yield album. And they have that, they tour for that, and they end the decade, interestingly enough, with the biggest hit single of their career, a cover of the old early 60s song, I think, Last Kiss. And it was a huge hit for them. Ronen, question, Last Kiss, what the hell?
Yeah.
What do you think?
How much time do you have? I don't know. People love it. I don't know what I can say. It's I try not to begrudge anyone their happiness, but I I'm not a fan of the song, but I guess to each their own.
As the co-hosts and co-producers of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, we like to think of ourselves as a populist operation. That explains why we sought to bring Ronen Givony onto the air with us today to discuss his book, Not For You, Pearl Jam and the Present Tense. Our premise, of course, is this. Pearl Jam is a band that just doesn't get the respect it deserves from the critics, music bloggers, historians, and other fancy intelligentsia types you would think would fawn over these guys and their legacy. But they don't. We don't pretend, however, that Pearl Jam is the only one of these underappreciated, blatantly dissed bands of their era, or of any other era for that matter. Is there a band that you feel deserves the same treatment that we're giving Pearl Jam on this episode? Let us know. Reach out immediately. The email address again is curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. I will say this, Ronen. I think your take on Yield in the book is like spot on. Spot on. I think that the beginning of that record is probably the best streak, or it's personally my favorite streak of anything that they've done. So I think we have synergy there. And then, of course, I get to ask kind of a Chris Farley's question. Is it really true that they've only played No Way 10 times in concert since that album came out?
I mean, I think for some reason Stone is not a big fan of it. Like I've seen, I can't remember if it was Pearl Jam 20 or one of those shows, but like Ed almost like calling an audible and wanting to play that, and Stone just getting like outright annoyed. Like so, again, I think that this is just part of what people love about them is like this. This kind of human story, like just about, there's the song and there's like the more larger than life kind of aspect. And then you're like, well, it's Stone and it's Ed and it's Jeff, like just dudes,
Yeah. That pretty much is the case that like, if you think about it, like Gossard and Ament and to an extent McCready, they just have this utter normalness to them. And then they have this front guy, this front man who's got this charisma and, built that mythology of around him. And, it is just kind of an interesting mix. So.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's true, and then moving on to like, 2000, and the new century and the new decade. The first significant event for Pearl Jam that year was significant for bad reasons, obviously the Roskilde Festival disaster in Denmark, where I believe it's Denmark, where several people were just crushed to death near the front of the stage. I remember reading this on YouTube. I wonder what your opinion is, Ronen. You find a lot of stupid stuff on the YouTube comment section, but sometimes you find some interesting stuff. And from the video that I was watching, someone mentioned that he or she, but I think it was a he, believes that beginning with this festival and the disaster that happened there, from that point onward, Stone Gossard and specifically Gossard kind of started mailing it in from a creative standpoint. I mean, he's still playing, he's still performing, he's always on tour with those guys whenever they want him, he's always there. But it never seemed like his heart was ever really in it as much as it was before. I'm not sure. I'm kind of on the fence in that theory. What do you think?
Well, I don't agree, but I think to say someone is phoning it in for 20 years is a little insulting. But I would say this, like, which is, there's a really good book that a journalist from Denmark wrote about Roskilde, and he kind of took it upon himself to like be an intermediary between the families and the band. And I think it was Stone more than anyone who made maybe half a dozen trips. I might even be undercounting that, but to Sweden and Denmark and became quite friendly with the families. And so I don't think you can overstate the importance of that event. I've been thinking about Roscoe a lot lately too, just obviously because of Houston and
Yes.
Travis Scott and all that. And I like, look, you can say on the one hand, like, maybe that did take the wind out of Pearl Jam a little bit and kind of make them a different band. Like, who can say, you know what I mean? Like, but I guess I'm struck more than anything about how, like, in Houston, like, the show went on like 37 minutes or whatever after there were ambulances in the crowd. Like,
I know.
With Pearl Jam, they were like, I mean, there were a couple of songs in, but they were upset that they didn't stop 5 minutes earlier. You know what I mean? Like, so so it's just a different level of, yeah. I mean, I think that's the line, isn't it? Like it's everything before that and after that with them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can say that, but also on the concert security thing, I live just outside of Houston, Ronen, and obviously it's been a big story here. But come on, 1979 in Cincinnati, 2000 in Denmark, and now here we are in 2021, and it happens again. It's just it boggles my mind that I don't know if it's a failure of promotion or just, there will always be overly excitable people in dangerous spots or something. But I don't know, maybe it's equivalent of, Altamont in 69 and Woodstock in 99. And it's like, does anybody ever learn from these things? It's just sort of there's a continuum. Again, it's, time, place, and experience. I don't know. I mean, and any thoughts on that here we are 21 years later and we have another one of these things?
Well, I mean, I guess I hasten to say, like, I wasn't there and I really have not seen any of the footage or anything, but like, from what I know, like, I guess about Travis Scott and just what I've read, like, the energy that seems to be like, that seems to have been like in the venue that night, he like starting mosh pits, you know what I mean? Like he and it's funny that, like, not funny, sorry, it's ironic and weird that, like, mosh pits is precisely like what this whole scene we've been talking about, like, Pearl Jam and Nirvana, like that was like, and at a certain point those guys were like, you know what, this is lame. You know what I mean? Like I think there was basically like a year or two where they were like, okay, like, we had it in the video and it's fun and but like starting in 1993, I feel like you can hear Ed say, like, you know what, let's not do this anymore. Or even, like you're hurting people. And and so that's the part where I'm like, what is it about live music today, pop music today, whatever, that like of all the things to revive, like violence in the crowd, like I don't know, it's like so yeah, but I think if anything, like, Pearl Jam has always been just super mindful and careful with their audience, and that will only be more so when they come back around.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So
around also, like, we're in 2000. This is a fandom question, pure fandom question. Starting in 2000, also, this is kind of like the beginning of diminishing returns when it comes to the quality of Pearl Jam's recorded output. Ronen, we as fans, how do we deal with the arrival of bad albums by our dearly beloved bands?
Well, I mean, good question. Like, I
felt this with REM. I'm a big REM fan, and they started to suck after a while, and
yeah,
it's hard.
I mean, there are people who are real partisans of the Avocado record. There's people who really like Lightning Bolt.
Mhm.
I don't know. I guess like intellectually, like I like the fact that a band can be around long enough that, like there's Radiohead fans who think like OK Computer is not their best record. You know what I mean? Like
right.
there
Yeah.
like there's like a whole post OK Computer like fandom. So I think it's fine. You know what I mean? Like I my taste is pretty different, and I think like they just have so many like things that we all agree on that like it's just not really worth fighting over.
Yeah.
Good way to answer.
Pretty much.
Back to the point, as we go down the Pearl Jam timeline, we get to 02, 03, which is the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as I'm sure we all remember, Pearl Jam were like the only big name mainstream rock band to loudly protest those wars and the political involvement there. This, of course, it killed the Dixie Chicks' careers, but it didn't kill Pearl Jam's career. So, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but Ronen, what do you think? What does that say about rock fandom and country fandom?
That women don't get a fair shake.
Yeah.
That might have something to do with it, or at least country artists. I don't know. They're just certain things. Yeah, I just it fascinates me on that. And go ahead.
I also think it comes down to like the fandom of the genres in general. I mean, country music, mainstream country music fans in general tend to be a bit right-wing conservative. Whereas, rock music fans, not to say there aren't any, conservative rock fans, but rock fans in general tend to be more on the liberal spectrum. That's just my opinion,
Right. Except when it comes to the war in Iraq, I guess.
Yeah.
Except when, that was like the one fissure. Like you said that, you get all of these things, all these commonalities, and except for when Eddie wants to come out in a rubber bush mask and, do his little sarcastic bit.
I mean, but here's the thing, though. Like, I've read interviews with Vedder and a couple of the other, I think Ament mentioned this too, that in Denver, you had the incident with the George Bush mask, Uniondale, when Slater Kinney opened, you had that thing. But both of those guys have said that, there were a lot of people booing us, but we were doing similar stuff like that in other areas, other cities, and we got a lot of cheers as well. It wasn't all boos.
Yeah. And well, I mean, it never is with a band that has that kind of a mixture of fans. Ronen, question. So you say in the book that you really kind of, you didn't start, I think you said you attended your first Pearl Jam show in 97, but it was really in about 2001 that the involvement in the, I guess you could call it the Pearl Jam community, or that sort of serious fandom of knowing which one of the 585 versions of Even Flow is the best. So, and this is at the time of, like, right around that same time that we're talking about, that there's this break from, they've gotten through Yield and now they're starting to normalize, which means they're starting to fade from the mainstream. This is around the same time that you joined the community. And so that is an interesting point too of your journey. How did you get started with this? And I know that obviously we said that we like Pearl Jam and all those bands when we were kids. How did you hook onto this train and get it rolling downhill?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly. So basically I was fully on board up until around, it's weird because one of my favorite releases was Merkenball. Like up until Merkenball, I was all in. And then weirdly, like No Code was like, I don't know, 6 months later. And by that point I was kind of checked out. I don't know. Like it was just, I was 18 years old. I was obsessed with, Propaganda and Fugazi and The Promise Ring and Texas Is the Reason. And I was graduating from high school. And so I just, I think by around No Code, like I was like, oh, I like Oasis and I like, hip hop and whatever. And so I just checked out for 2 or 3 years. And then I went to college, and I still remember my roommate picked me up in Hartford at the airport and saying, dude, Pearl Jam has this new record. It's called Yield. It's amazing. And we started listening to it, and I was like, this is not bad. And then like we saw them play in Hartford. It was the day after the show at MSG where they played Breath, and they played Breath in Hartford too. And I was like, oh, cool. Like I didn't realize why it was special. And then the bootlegs came out. And that's when I really started getting into it. Like that's when, like I think I bought 5 of them in 2000, and just like hearing, like the Seattle bootleg with like The Kids Are All Right and stuff like that, and hearing, Don't Be Shy and like the covers and like and hearing like how they played the code stuff, like hearing how they played Present Tense and hearing how they played In My Tree, like that was when I was like, oh, like I'm all in. Like, and then I was just like, I graduated college and I could travel and had a little bit of money and a credit card and didn't mind going to see like 4 shows in Philly. Like, so from that point, and yeah, I mean, I wish I could have seen, the earlier tours, but I was, 15. So it was, unrealistic.
Yeah. I said,
Well, I was going to say too, like, I didn't really write about this in the book, but, just mention this, like, when I moved to New York, which was in 2004, which was around when I really started seeing a ton of shows, maybe, paradoxically, this is when I was really getting into classical music and really getting into electronic music. And on the surface, like, that's kind of a contradiction, like, I guess. But what I realized, and this is kind of why I've really got into classical music, like, obviously Pearl Jam people will argue all day about the merits of, the 94 tour versus 03, or Matt Cameron versus Dave Abbruzzese. And classical music people, like, maybe not surprisingly, like they will argue with you just as much about like the Glenn Gould 1955 recording of the Bach Goldberg variations versus the 1982, like which Beethoven conductor did the Seventh Symphony the best. Like, so, and it was, and it was that bootleg culture about Pearl Jam that I really appreciated. Like just how there were like, shows that quote everybody knew, and then there were shows that like if you didn't know to listen to the I don't know Charlotte, North Carolina show, like, but that's a gem, like and that's exactly like classical music is, like. Sure. you can spend years listening and just stumble upon something, and I don't know. So they just made a lot of sense to me, like side by side.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, because I have family friends, and well, I'm kind of like this with jazz and even jam band music too. I mean, the idea of there really is an ethos to no two things are ever the same.
Yes.
And so there's this selectivity. So at least on the timeline now, we're now approaching
I got a question related to what you guys were just talking about rediscovering Pearl Jam. And this question is this: in 2006, Pearl Jam released a self-titled album, or the Avocado record. At the time, it was hailed as a comeback, right? It was critically praised. I know, Ronen, you're not a big fan of it. Me, I just think it's okay. I think it's just solid, nothing special. And the year after this, in 2007, Eddie Vedder found solo success with the soundtrack to the movie Into the Wild, which I think is fantastic. And arguably, the soundtrack was more successful than the movie. So the two questions: number one, do you think, like I think, that the success of this soundtrack of Into the Wild that Vedder had as a solo artist that it somehow reflected back positively on Pearl Jam? And number two, from this period onward, from 06, 07 onward, do you think this is like the beginning of the normalization and the acceptance of the cult of Pearl Jam as something that's all right, it's cool, you know?
I mean, I'll answer that in reverse if I can. I mean, I think definitely 2006 is the tour where, I mean, I think they played more shows for that tour than any since 10. That's definitely the one where they just become like a very well-oiled professional machine where there's just not really much drama. There are surprises and changes night by night, but you're not, it's not like the Uniondale show, like there's no Uniondale show in 06, like, or really maybe ever after again, like, so, which, is not the worst. To your first question about Avocado versus Into the Wild, it's a good question. I mean, like, I guess I always wondered why Ed waited 16 years to make a solo record. I'm sure he had songs that could have constituted one before. You almost wonder like which songs he kept for himself and to what extent like Into the Wild is like I think Avocado was a successful record for them, like commercially, critically, but like you almost wonder to what extent that's him being like, no, really, we are still relevant, or I'm still relevant at the very least. Like, and I don't know, like I think Ed solo is a really interesting thing too. Like, I saw him on that tour in 07 at the Beacon, and which is like a 4,000 seat theater, and it was not my favorite show. Like, I don't know, maybe I was just not in the mental space at that time. Like, and so, I wrote in the book, about how like when he played again a solo tour in 2019, I was hesitant because I was like, well, it's not Pearl Jam. Like it's, Pearl Jam in Europe is a no-brainer. It's an instant, but I was like, Eddie Vedder in Lisbon, like seems a little bit indulgent, like, but that show, I mean, honestly was top 5 for me all time. Like, I mean, and I, maybe it was again, my mood, maybe it was just like, where I was at with the book, but like when he is, I think the solo show has changed too, but like, I mean, I'm not sure I'll miss him again, like solo, just because like that was so moving, and like it just it's not Pearl Jam, it's a different thing, and it's like if anything, it kind of brings you back to early like 90s where you're like, oh God, like this guy is just like can't look away.
Oh no, he captures the moment of the mood in a live setting, I think, as well as anybody who's ever lived. He's just, I mean, like I said, it's not just the charisma, but he just has it's almost like he gets locked in to a purpose, or a, not to sound cheesy, but almost like a communal experience with the audience. And so when he gets in that groove, I mean, he's as good as anyone. Two kind of, for what it's worth, comments. One, I think you're both wrong about Avocado. I think that's easily the best record they've done since Yield.
Maybe. I might agree with that. Yeah,
easily. But then I would actually pick Eddie's, and I can't remember the name of it, his ukulele record as his better solo work than Into the Wild. I don't know if you probably don't agree with that, Ronen, but I
like that one a lot, actually. I mean, I like them for different reasons and different tunes, like, but I like, I mean, like, it's interesting too. Like, I think everyone in that band has done solo records, like, and it's, again, it's interesting to compare them to Radiohead, because like in Radiohead, even the singer and like the rhythm guitarists have done solo records. Nobody really cares, like, but it's, with the exception of maybe Johnny Greenwood, like doing There'll Be Blood, like people like, they kind of just want them to stick with the band. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's true. Although, I mean, that actually is a good memory too. I loved the Brad record from 1997 that Stone and friends did. So
I adore the Mad Season record that McCready did with Lane Staley. That's mine thing, right? That's my thing right there. You know?
yeah. So
Anyway, well, speaking of sticking together, well, Pearl Jam stuck together for a long, long ass time until they got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're now a legacy band. You know, I mean, if not top 10, they really should be on anyone's list of the top 20 American bands of all time. And I really do believe that. Ronen, my question for you, now that we've kind of like, you know, we're at that, you know, they're the old man, you know, elder state, like I said before, the elder statesman stage. How does the excitement of a Pearl Jam show now generate? What does it generate for you now?
Well, it's been a minute since I've seen them. Sadly,
Yeah.
I did not go to any of the festival shows. Not like, mostly because I'm just a brat and I just want to see the full thing in an arena. But look, I'll say this: like, we on Twitter and online, like, everyone was trying to figure out what they would play first in New Jersey. You know, some people said Ocean, some people said Alive, some people said Long Road, which maybe would have been the obvious one, you know. But what do they open with? 3 songs from their new record.
yeah,
You know
I know. I saw that like, what's it called? Super Wolf. Whatever.
Right. And so I just kind of cracked up at that. Like, I was like, you know what? I'm not sure those would have been the first 3 that I would have asked for, but like, God bless them just for like keeping us guessing. You know what I mean?
But for you, the author of this book, and a Pearl Jam fanatic, what do you think is really what marks the enduring legacy and the importance of Pearl Jam back then until now? Like, why were they important, and why they still matter, and what is their legacy about?
Well, I mean, I think they matter first and foremost because of the music. You know, I think that it's kind of like the easiest thing to take for granted. And I think that in their case, especially, like, they do so many other things, their activism and their fan service and their just ethics, that like you're tempted, or one is tempted to be like, you know, looking at all the secondary things. But, you know, like, I've been in bars like where Better Man comes on for karaoke, and you know, like, there are just like there are songs, you know, like Wonderwall and Better Man, and you know, like that just you know, it doesn't matter what year it came out, it doesn't matter like if you heard on MTV, like they just have a handful, maybe 2 handfuls of indestructible tunes like that, that really speak to people across language, across age, like, and you know, that's why you can see Eddie Vedder play to 20,000 people in Portugal, like, most of whom, you know, English is not their primary language, and they sing every word, like,
right.
You know, on top of that, like, I think that you know, there's many bands, you know, like, I don't know, the Foo Fighters have been around for 25 years. I don't know a ton about them, but I guess I'd be surprised if I knew that, like, the person who signed up for the Foo Fighters fan club the first year was still in the front row. You know what I mean? Like, there are things at Pearl Jam where, like, you know, they don't really need to send out a 7-inch single. You know what I mean? They don't really need to send out a fan newsletter, or like, you know, have like whatever infant onesie, like you know, in their merch section, like, but it's I don't know, like, you just get the sense that like there's a human being on the other end, and I just don't think you can overstate that.
And on that note, Ronen Givony, thank you so much for hanging out with us here for a little bit, and giving us your thoughts and your experiences as a Pearl Jam fan, as a student of their music and of that era and of the culture that they fit in and out of. We really appreciate you being here, man. And tell folks, coincidentally, the best way that they can get a hold of this book, or channels through which they can buy this book, not named Amazon.
Yes. Well, I think it's only fitting for a Pearl Jam theme book. If you can support your nearest bookstore and the good people who go to the trouble of curating shelves and choosing favorites. It just came out in paperback a week or two ago. And for anyone in Hungary, Serbia, Italy, Spain, or one other country I'm not remembering, it will also be out in your language soon. And I just want to say to both of you guys, having done, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so interviews, you can definitely tell when people have read the book and when they haven't, and when they have thought about it when they haven't. I've had probably 3 interviews where people say, how many times have you seen the band? Which makes you wonder if they even opened it. Like, but I really appreciate just, the thoughtfulness. And I hope that we can have a beer or something and talk more.
I'd love to.
No, absolutely.
Well, all right. That was awesome. Ronen is a really, really sharp guy, and it was fantastic picking his brain about Pearl Jam and about fan culture and about the last 30 years of our history here as Gen Xers. So now we are going to do our usual shtick here, and we're entering the vault. You hear the coins dropping. You hear that little funk groove. That means that Arturo and I are getting on our hazmat suits, and we are spraying the nuclear walls, looking for the finest cockroaches among our collective, what do you call it? CDs, MP3s, vinyl. I mean, whatever the medium you want to call it.
Just call it physical media.
Physical media. No, there is no virtual media in the vault. There is only physical media.
That's
and so
right.
we are pulling out physical albums, one each of old stuff. Parallel Universe is new stuff. The Vault is old stuff. And so this is album reviews. Again, this is old stuff. So Arturo, what's your old stuff this week?
My old stuff is not that old. It's from 16 years ago, but it is an old guy. This is Robert Plant and his 2005 album, Mighty Rearranger. Now, Robert Plant is featured on this episode's Vault segment because as of this recording, Plant and Alison Krauss's new album, Raise the Roof, will have been released. Hint, hint, that may be included in our parallel universe for next episode. That album, of course, is the highly anticipated follow-up to Plant and Krauss's brilliant Grammy Award-winning album, Raising Sand, from 2007. Now, for our loyal curmudgeonly listeners out there, if I have to explain to you who Robert Plant is, you probably should not be listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, get the fuck out.
Nevertheless, I will explain anyway. He was the legendary lead singer of the iconic rock band Led Zeppelin. And sorry, folks, I'll draw the line when it comes to explaining who Led Zeppelin were. No need to explain that, okay? Like a lot of rock legends from the 1960s and 70s, Plant's 1980s output was sketchy at best. It was mostly overproduced, slick pop, firmly entrenched and dated in that era. Lots of reverb, lots of corny synthesizers, thin compressed guitars, and drums that sounded like bomb explosions.
What?
Oh yeah, and heavy on the sentimental ballads.
Yeah, what, you didn't like Big Log?
Crazy in the ship of fools. Yeah, no, I didn't. No, I never dug that. However, he had a bit of a comeback in the 1990s when he reunited with his Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page. That resulted in 1994's No Quarter. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page unleaded a live album of mostly reworked Zeppelin songs with a few new ones, done with a Moroccan string band and an Egyptian orchestra. They came back in 1998 with Walking into Clarksdale, an album of mostly original songs that was surprisingly mediocre, considering that this was
the talent. Yeah.
this was essentially a Led Zeppelin reunion in all but name. Gee, I wonder what bassist John Paul Jones must have thought of all this Page and Plant activity.
Yeah.
He must have been pissed off.
Well,
Anyway.
well, if you remember when they got inducted into the Hall of Fame, this is when they were starting all this stuff. John Paul Jones comes up there and says, it's a pleasure to come into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with you guys. Hopefully one day you'll remember my phone number.
Yeah, that was a dig for sure.
Mm-hmm.
A few years later, this all brings us to 2005, when Plant unleashed Mighty Rearranger with his, at the time, new backing band, The Strange Sensation. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but for yours truly and these curmudgeonly years, it was a revelation to hear Plant sound this regenerated, this lively, this swinging, this rocking, and this contemporary for 2005, and this exotic. And the exoticism comes from the fact that while Plant indulged in North African rhythms and textures in his collaborations with Jimmy Page, it's the off-kilter desert blues of West Africa, especially after the then emergence of Tuareg nomad band Tinariwen, that really informed this album. Shine It All Around was the super bass groovy lead-off track and single that got the Grammy nomination, but it's Tin Pan Alley with its tense, soft, loud dynamics that comes closest to the, I guess we would call the majestic power of Led Zeppelin.
Tin Pan Valley, by the way, not Tin Pan Alley.
Oh, thank you for correcting me. Tin Pan Valley. Arguably, it's the most Zeppelin-esque moment of Plant's solo career, which is telling considering he's spent most of his solo career avoiding the Led Zepp mystique. There's another song called Freedom Fries. It's the track that most gives away its hand and its debt to West African blues with that tight-ass syncopated groove. Drummer Clive Deemer, the drummer of the Strange Sensation, he's the secret star of this show. He's clearly indebted to John Bonham and his heaviness, as any drummer would who's playing with Robert Plant, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, but it's heaviness put through a West African filter of groove. It's really hypnotic, the way he plays and the way he carries a lot of the music on this album. Subtle electronic textures, shade, moody tracks like Enchanter. You get the sweet Birdsian Rickenbacker guitars that ornament the gore or provide an ornament to the gorgeous Dancing in Heaven. You have a song called Somebody Knocking, which somehow makes acoustic African blues sound weirdly psychedelic. Plant also puts his best foot forward with the lyrics as well. They veer from scathing critiques of a vapid society obsessed with media. Guess who looked into the future here?
Yeah, no shit.
and allegorical, not so subtle protests of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. If you're lucky enough to listen to a version of the album that has the bonus track Red, White, and Blue, you'll hear a song that you hear Robert Plant overtly attacking the archetype of the jingoistic, ignorant, intolerant white American male. Planty pulls no punches on this album, lyrically nor musically. It's important to note that every song on this album was co-written with members of the Strange Sensation band. Nevertheless, it really doesn't diminish what Plant accomplished by one iota. This isn't only his greatest solo work, it's his best solo album by fucking far. And one that makes his otherwise great and more celebrated collaboration with Alison Krauss seem pretty lightweight by comparison. So,
yeah, and he's done a couple of pretty good records of his own here in the last decade too. Not just with Alison Krauss. I think, like you said, this was kind of what woke him up. Plant is, I will say this, he's one of the great interpreters of vernacular or world or I guess you can even go as far as to say sort of indigenous musics.
Right.
I mean, obviously, stealing from Willie Dixon and Robert Johnson is kind of what made him his money. But but he just knows how to sing into those rhythms. I mean, here's the guy, like I said, he takes the Mississippi blues guys and mainstreams them, but he's also bright enough and brilliant enough that him and Alison Krauss do the Everly Brothers cover there, Gone, Gone, Gone.
Yeah.
Is just extraordinary of how he kind of captures the kind of the rockabilly spirit that it was written with. Like he sings it, like they sing that better than Don and Phil. It's kind of amazing. So, but yeah, no, this record, need to mention Red, White, and Blue is included on the version of the album that is available on Spotify.
Aha.
So it is.
So it's on. Okay, so it's there. Okay.
Yeah, it is not a hidden track or a bonus track. It is there in full glory for download. Just as I always am apt to do, 116,462 downloads to date. Let's get that up by 1 million, folks, because we know there's 1 million of you listening right now.
Yeah, but it wasn't on the original CD version in 2005. Red,
Right.
White, and Blue.
Yeah, and like you said, there were a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one probably, it was around that time that that the iPods and MP3s were taking off, and so all of a sudden there was this less of an emphasis on filling a disc with as much music as possible. But also, like you said, it was 2005, and it's an anti-war song in 2005, which was like a third rail for anybody that wanted a career, with the exception of Pearl Jam, as we distinguished earlier in this episode. That was like the one band that didn't get killed that spoke up. But it's there, and again, it's good to see Robert Plant still kicking. Really looking forward to hearing the new Plant and Krauss record. I'm imagining that T-Bone Burnett is involved in this one too.
Yes,
as well.
he is. He produced it as well. Yep.
Yeah, because again, T-Bone is just awesome. So, yep, Robert Plant, who for whatever reason, I guess what is Plant now, like 73?
Yes, he is 70. He turned 73 this year.
Yeah, and think about him, that even when he was 20 years old, he looked old.
It's something about the British. They just age quickly.
Yeah, or maybe there's his bone structure or something. But even when he was 20, he looked old, and now he's actually old.
Right, so from one classic rocker to another.
Yes, and not just classic rocker, classic British rocker. Now we're gonna look at the work of Stevie Winwood and Traffic here in a sec. So, Steve Winwood, he's as essential to the breakout of British-born, American-inspired rock as Plant is, but not as indelible and not as immovable in terms of history, which is too damn bad, as I'll get into here shortly. We're going to be focusing on the album John Barleycorn Must Die from 1970, a personal favorite of mine. So here are my thoughts. Steve Winwood is one of rock's most unappreciated geniuses. Most of you probably remember Winwood's incessantly played, unendingly annoying #1 hit from the mid-'80s, Higher Love, and the even more annoying middle-aged White Blood Blue Stomp Roll With It a couple years later.
Roll with it, baby.
Yeah. There you go. It was just corny as hell and too bad, because if you rewind to a couple of decades before then, we are then examining one of British rock's great singer-songwriters and organ players of that fertile era. That, of course, is saying a lot. I mean, a lot. Back then, if Steve Winwood was involved, whether it be in the writing of your songs or in the joining of your band, chances are that what you were doing was pretty freaking great. The Spencer Davis Group's fabulous faux Motown R&B anthem, Give Me Some Lovin', that is 16-year-old Stevie on vocals and Hammond organ. Chicago's rockin' rendition of I'm a Man, Winwood co-wrote that. The organ part on Jimi Hendrix's Voodoo Child.
Yes, I was gonna say that. I was gonna interrupt you. You beat me to it.
Yep, and we're talking about the awesome full live version, not the single. Yep, that is Steve Winwood, having the nerve to solo jam right alongside the mighty king of the axe. Hell, this guy even helped save Eric Clapton from himself, not once, but twice, allowing the guitar god to shut up and play in both Eric Clapton and the Powerhouse and then Blind Faith. But Winwood's coolest and most indelible and incredible work came as a founding member of the band Traffic, which was rightfully inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004. Now, with Traffic, Winwood joined forces with Jim Capaldi, Dave Mason, and Chris Wood to form one of the most original and consistently surprising bands that I have encountered in my own rock and roll journey. They first formed in 1967 and released the album Mr. Fantasy. This first volley was decidedly psychedelic and jammy, though Winwood's preternatural gifts as a blue-eyed soul singer distinguished Traffic from a pack of bands dabbling in a similar aesthetic at the time. He supplied them with striking melodies and an ability to translate Capaldi's hippy-dippy lyrics. Now, 1968 found the band delivering their most well-known song, Feeling All Right. Now, this is a groovy Dave Mason pen tune that was made much more famous by Joe Cocker and then rocked very, very hard years later by the Black Crowes.
I actually think the Cocker version is the best version of that song.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, Cocker's version is definitely the best version, but the Black Crowes, they're one of the Curmudgeon Rock Report minted, awesome, great classic bands of all time. Their version's pretty damn good, too. We move into 1969, which proved rocky for Traffic, and on and off infighting caused the group to disband there for a while after the next album and not so great album, Last Exit. Now, it was during this time away from Traffic in 1969, Winwood worked with Clapton and Blind Faith, which was very, very good stuff, and with Ginger Baker, who obviously worked with Clapton and Cream, and Winwood was part of Ginger Baker's Air Force. And in both of these cases, he was grounding slop blues, as I will call it, with feeling and maybe even some pathos. So now we have the reunion of Traffic. They found their way back together as a trio without Dave Mason this time. And they recorded what I think is their absolute masterpiece, John Barleycorn Must Die. Now, since it's sandwiched between Feeling All Right and 1972's The Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys, which is the Traffic album that our curmudgeonly community may be most familiar with, Barleycorn is something of a lost classic. But I'm here to bring it back into the light, dang it. The album's music is written by Winwood and Winwood alone, with lyrics provided by Capaldi. And oh, what a musical brew Winwood cooks up here. This is a fabulous mashing of jazz, soul, pop, and folk, where Hammond C3 organ can exist side by side with flutes, where sharp tenor sax solos somehow enhance laid-back piano and clap drum grooves, and nasty-ass electric guitar solos drop their way into back porch folk soul hybrids. Some highlights. There's the 7.5-minute opening instrumental, Glad, which is just, how do you describe it? It's just freaking cool. It's just got this kind of almost New Orleans kind of funky, kind of almost not laid back, but also not aggressive.
I would describe it as like early Chicago, but actually good.
Yeah, that's pretty good description actually. But it's got this really just kind of eclectic, fun mix of instrumentation, fantastic tenor sax, and it starts off as kind of this. Kind of, tap your foot, kind of up tempo, little shifty, not quite rocker, and it's really got it's a well named song. It's a very glad vibe, but then as it goes along, it slowly gets woozy, and it slows down into this almost kind of maybe not psychedelic, but almost kind of spooky and mysterious. Sexy outro, and the piano and sax never quite disappear. So that's tremendous. We have a couple of other things. Empty Pages is a marvelous pop ditty that has got this electric piano solo in the middle of it that I'm sure Alain Toussaint might be proud of, as the papas of this kind of thing. Lightly approaches funk. And this kind of thing happens several times throughout the course of this record. It's one of these unique records that it rocks balls without actually rocking balls. and it's all in the rhythm and the grooves, and there's a simultaneous, and Winwood was this gift, there's a simultaneous looseness and tightness. The songs are tight, the playing is loose. And so it's all in how you manipulate the spaces in between the instrumentation. It's pretty awesome. So Traffic would go on to make 3 more albums, at one point inviting Dave Mason back for a couple of those, before breaking up for good in the mid-1970s. Of course, as we mentioned, Winwood's star rose much higher than this afterward, while Traffic itself mostly faded into the dollar bins of rock history, unfortunately. Kind of pisses me off. No matter, Traffic represents Winwood's best and most shiningly fantastical, wonderful work. And John Barleycorn Must Die is the eclectic, wondrous center of that sublime accumulation of music. What say you?
I like this album a lot. Yeah, I mean, Traffic have always been a very underrated band throughout, rock history as the decades have moved on. They've always been overshadowed by bands like the Grateful Dead, and understandable. The Dead are awesome, but they've always been overshadowed by the other jam bands. The Dead and the Allman Brothers and all that stuff. And Traffic deserves a little more attention than that. I actually, honestly, I'm more of a fan of the Low Spark of High Heeled Boys. That's my personal favorite Traffic album.
Yeah.
But this one's got some great stuff too. Like I said, Glad. Glad was a hit for a reason. That's why it's a staple on classic rock radio.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Glad, and then, the 2 songs you hear mostly from Traffic are really, obviously Feeling All Right, but Mr. Fantasy probably is the one that gets the most play. And then obviously the Low Spark probably gets some play too, and then. Like I said, Low Spark is got more sort of traditional, sort of accessible pop melodies, and and it's certainly more economical. It's worth mentioning. Again, Winwood had range because the title song there, John Barleycorn Must Die, is something that would make Fairport Convention jealous. It's very elves in the forest kind of stuff. As to bring out an old inside joke between Arturo and I. But anyway, like I said, part of the purpose of the Vault is to bring out stuff that is either criminally ignored or is obscure with a cool story, or you're making a case for an artist. Occasionally, we'll go mainstream. We pulled a neat trick here. We picked 2 big names with doing stuff that no one pays nearly enough attention to.
Yeah, I mean, Winwood, this is arguably Traffic's most overlooked album. And Robert Plant, I mean, he'll always go down as the voice of Led Zeppelin. That's what he is. He always will be that. He's like enshrined and he's frozen in carbonite like Han Solo is that, But,
and if he was frozen in carbonite, we would still all be paying attention to his trousers as we do in Song Remains the Same. Either he was pulling a Derek Smalls or he was more hung than most horses in the world.
Yeah, no shit. Well, and on that note, congratulations, Robert Plant, on your new album coming out. Congratulations on the Curmudgeons giving you love for your greatest solo work. And congratulations on Steve Winwood, the old timers, baby boomer rockers getting some love.
Absolutely. So now we're leaving the Vault, and folks, thank you for hanging out with us. Remember, curmudgeonrock@gmail.com, @curmudgeonpod, and very, very soon, the Facebook group will be up there. We want to thank Ronen Givony again. Remember, the name of the book is Not For You, Pearl Jam and the Present Tense. His name is Ronen Givony. That's Givony. We encourage you to buy it anywhere except Amazon. As Ronen mentioned, there are record stores that have sold this thing. There are probably indie bookstores. I know that when Arturo visited me here in Houston, we went to a record store where he was able to buy a book on The Replacements. So give love to your local indie record store, because chances are they will have the cool books.
So here we are at the end of another episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. We just wanted to thank Ronen Givony again for coming on the show and indulging us in conversation about Pearl Jam and his book, Not For You, Pearl Jam in the Present Tense, which you can pick up at a local bookstore or a local record store, and that would be doing a great service to your community, and you can revisit a band we're sure that you love. So tune in to the next episode of our beloved podcast here, your podcast, when we'll be talking about Stone Temple Pilots. Be well, y'all, and we'll talk to you soon.